Tai Joseph Carson. Joseph yra Segura Chef Security Evangelist ir Advisory CISO. Jis sukaupęs daugiau nei 30 metų patirtį kibernetinio saugumo srityje, konsultuodamas tiek vyriausybės, tiek tarptautinės įmonės ir kritinės infrastruktūros tiekėjus. Taip pat Joseph yra knygos Cyber Security for Dummies autorius, Security by Default tinklalaidės vedėjas ir sertifikuotas CISSP ir OSCP specialistas. Nuo pavogtų prisijungimo duomenų iki privilegijų išplėtimo, kibernetiniai nusikaltėliai apeina perimetro apsaugą, pasinaudodami jūsų organizacijos pasitikėjimu skaitmeninėmis tapatybėmis. Šioje sesijoje išnagrinėsime naujausias tapatybės pagrįstas atakų technikas, pasidalinsime realiais pažeidimų scenarijais, taip pat pamatysite, kaip Segura suteikia jums matomumą, atpažįstamumą, aktyvią kontrolę, reikalingą rizikai identifikuoti ir sumažinti. Ladies and gentlemen, and now our final speaker of the day, a very special guest. He is the Chef Security Evangelist and Advisor CISO at Segura with more than 30 years of cybersecurity experience, author of Cyber Security of Dummies and true global expert. Please welcome on stage Joseph Carson.
Awesome, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And really excited about actually the opportunity to be back here in Vilnius. It's been a long time, a couple of years. And what I'm going to try to do today is also I'm going to try and do a live demo. So that's always, I think, the best thing for you to see is the products and the solutions themselves. But I'm also going to take you through also live hacking techniques as well to show you how the attackers actually do their, basically their ransomware, their data exfiltration, their privilege elevation. So I'm going to take you through all of the steps today. I know I'm between you and the end of the day, so it's always the most challenging session to do. So let's go through. We're going to take you through defending identity-based cyber attacks, and I'll take you through also how Segura actually defends against those. So my name is Joseph Carson, and thank you for the warm welcome and introduction. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. I'm based in Tallinn, Estonia. I'm not Estonian. I'm actually originally Irish, but Estonia has been my home for over 22 years. So yes, the gray hair shows that I've been in this a long time. My first start was back in 1991, when security was very different back then. It was literally the key to the room, where the keyboard and the dumb terminal was in. I'm also the host of an award-winning podcast, so if you're interested in following me on the podcast, it's Security by Default. It's a bi-weekly podcast, which has different guests on. Recently, there was Joe Grand on the podcast, Secretary Harry Coker, who was a former advisor for the White House, and also Hugh No, who was also an identity hacker, who was formerly a black hat, who transformed into being helping victims of cybercrime. So always good to have different leaders and different people on the podcast as well. So I'm going to take you through. I've got a lot to cover today, and I'm hopefully going to give you some insights and some good education. So the first challenge is in this industry, we have lots and lots of challenges, lots of threats, lots of risks. And I think over all the years I've been in this industry, I think one of the things I've seen is the increasing of complexity. We're living in a world of complexity. As I mentioned, that when I started, things were much simpler. You knew what the data was. You actually knew what the physical servers and the mainframes that hosted that data was. You could actually physically touch the connections, the cables, the serial cables that actually connected those devices together. In the world we live in today, everything is interconnected, interoperability. We've moved even beyond just of accelerated hyperconnectivity. We've moved into a world where basically it's went from even bring your own device to bring your own office. During the times of COVID, you brought your own office to the organization. And then we've moved into the world of bring your own identity. So you're actually bringing your own credentials and identity to organizations. And now with the advancements of other technologies, it's also bring your own agent, your own mini version of you, your own intelligence to organizations. So things have become so complex, and we also live in a world of not just on-premise, but we also live in the world of SaaS, of basically infrastructure as a service, applications as a service, to the point where basically everything is moving around interconnected between cloud environments and hybrid cloud as well. But also the things we have to deal with in this industry is increased budget pressure, where basically organizations are struggling with the budget to do more with less actually finances, less budget capabilities. We also have to do things quicker. Attacks, I remember 20 years ago when you were actually deploying a solution, it actually took 2 years. 2 years to deploy something like Tivoli and TNG and massive applications and to deploy and integrate those. It took a long time. Now we have to do things yesterday. Cyber attacks, they don't wait. They don't take 6 months to get out there. They happen constantly all the time. So we can't live in a world of static technology. We can't live in a world of basically static policies where things don't evolve. We have to get to where security is almost like a living organism within the organizations, that it adapts, it evolves, it actually updates immediately. So we can no longer basically sit around and have lots of time. We have to do things yesterday, and we have to do them fast. And that means technology also must be able to adopt quickly. We also live in a world where IT is no longer just about systems. I remember also when basically it was all about just technology. The basically system that we had to deal with was not people, it was actually just applications and servers and infrastructure. Today, businesses depend and live on the actually technology that we do. I love Mikko Hyppinen's term is that we're no longer just protecting IT systems, we're actually protecting society. We're protecting the social sphere and the people around us. Actually, civilization, we're protecting civilians and organizations within the states as well. So increased user friction, we have to think about the user. And we hear lots of terms about things like zero trust. And I believe that zero trust is great from a technology perspective, but we also have to think about zero friction. How do we make sure the technology works for the users? How do we make sure that people actually enjoy using the technology, or to move it as much as possible into the backgrounds so it's not even actually causing them friction or actually in the foreground causing them pain? And also we're living in a world of increased cyber attacks. They constantly increase, becoming more sophisticated, more accessible to even junior or even script kiddies. So we also have to deal with a lot of the increased threats and attacks out there. And also, we also have to deal with increased threats to data sovereignty as well. There's lots of political destabilization, there's lots of wars happening around the world, there's lots of regulation, and we have to make sure that we're protecting the sovereignty and the data of the information that we've been basically having to protect as well. Now, we also can't ignore AI. AI has been also a massive change and transformation in this industry. And I want to share some of my research and insights, what I've seen, the reality of what AI has been doing from an attack perspective. The biggest thing that AI has enabled for attackers is much more sophisticated social engineering and phishing capabilities. Me being based in Estonia, the language has been a protection for the country for many, many years. The language is very complicated. It's very challenging for attackers who want to target the Estonian language or even the Finnish language. They had to get somebody to translate it properly for them because it was very easy to detect when a phishing campaign came in. You could easily detect actually mistakes in the grammar and the challenges. When generative AI and GPT engines have started being used for phishing campaigns, the language is no longer protection. That means that the actually translations that's happening in real time is so accurate, so sophisticated, to the point where it's perfect. The actually translations are perfect, and now it's very difficult to be able to tell the difference between something that was actually historically generated by attackers to actually the authenticity that they look today. So that's one thing I've seen with AI being used in attacks. The second part where I've seen AI being used in attacks is around the actually data analytics. Where in the past, 2-3 years ago, the attackers, if they exfiltrated, they got into the organization, they'd be able to exfiltrate maybe a couple of gigabytes or terabytes of data. It may have taken them weeks or months to analyze the data that they'd stolen. They may not have enough insights or intelligence into what they actually even had. Now with AI, they can take that data that they've exfiltrated, they can run it through a large language model, and they can start asking it questions. Show me where all the credentials is in this data dump. Show me the hashes. Show me the personal identifiable information, credit card information, financial information. They can also start looking and making that more intelligent. They can do that in real time. It's to move from actually weeks to months to seconds where they can analyze data. And this is something that we also have to look at as well. Another interesting area in the second half of last year, that I saw AI being used in attacks is actually in chatbots, where previously, this first half of last year, I would have been in instant response, I would have been interacting directly with the criminal. I've been having conversations, negotiations, and having conversations either through burning emails, through Telegram, or other chat messaging services. And ultimately, second half of last year, that all changed. I was no longer talking with a person. I was negotiating with a chatbot, with an AI chatbot. So there's a positives and good things about that. There's one of the positives, it also means cyber criminals are also losing their job to AI. But also the negatives is that it's very, very difficult to negotiate with a chatbot. There's no empathy. They have a specific goal and a specific task, and you have to try and actually negotiate directly with that. And it actually removes all empathy, and it's very challenging. So yes, we also have to deal with the criminals who are actually moving to being more efficient and more effective, that they're looking to cut costs as well. They're looking to become more profitable, and one way of doing that is actually eliminating the middle tier, which is their support and negotiation and actually communication and translation services. They would have had to pay people in the past to do that. Now they don't need to do that. They've got solutions using AI to do that automatically for them. And they're also using AI to rewrite the code. Now, there's good things and bad things about that. One is that it rewrites the code in real time, so it can take intelligence from previous campaigns or previous failures and then try to boot that into the code in order to create new evasion techniques, new ways in order to exploit known vulnerabilities that may have not been patched by organizations. So we're able to actually rewrite the code in real time. There is an inefficient part of that as well, where actually I've had experiences where when I'm taking my old code from maybe 10 years ago, and I put it into GPT and I say, take this old code and turn it into Go. And ultimately, unfortunately, what happens is I take my 100 lines of code from 10 years ago, and now I have 1,500 lines of code. So GPTs, they might be good at actually taking things and creating templates and converting them, but sometimes they do create a lot of inefficiencies as well. So that's some of the things I've seen with AI. I've also seen improvements around the defense capabilities, but we're going to focus more on the attack techniques at the moment. So in a lot of the attack techniques, this is a little bit of kind of simpler version of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. What you see here is this is typically the steps that attackers go through. It's the blueprint. It's always the same process. They start off with open source intelligence. They want to know more about the potential to target the victims, what types of technology they're using, what types of security controls do they have in place. The more open source intelligence they gather at the beginning, the actually more successful they can be during the entire campaign. I will say that actually in this entire process, 90% of the attacker's time is probably spent in open source intelligence gathering before they even do the attack. They learn as much about the target as possible in order to be able to segue, to augment their techniques, to modify, to stay stealthy in order to be successful. Because ultimately their goal is to do it in order to make as much money and extortion and a ransom as possible. The enumeration stage is the next part where they actually look into understanding about how they can get in, how they can actually validate the information they've collected. Then vulnerability discovery, exploit creation, and then ultimately when they actually do the initial access, which is typically either two methods. It's either using phishing and social engineering to exploit the humans, or to try and gain access to actually weak credentials or compromised passwords. And then depending on the timing of the year, we see increased vulnerabilities. When they increase vulnerabilities, they tend to use exploits of vulnerabilities more often. And when those get patched, then they move back to the social engineering and phishing campaigns to gain access. So we see that in a wave, depending on how many exploits and vulnerabilities are out there to the actually techniques that are used. Once they have that initial foot in the door, the next stage is doing remote command execution, establishing persistence, creating backdoors, being able to maintain access to the organization, being able to actually then make sure that they might decide to sell that access off to another cyber criminal who might come back and do more hands-on keyboard, and then ultimately getting to the foothold. Privilege escalation tends to be typically focused around the non-human credentials, service accounts, applications, persistent hashes, persistent credentials, root accounts, administrator accounts, and local accounts as well. So we tend to see that moving away from the human aspect to more to the non-human, and that allows them to do lateral moves and ultimately get to the point where data exfiltration. So let's take it into a part of a demo. Let's take a look. This is actually an example of what I've seen from access brokers. So access brokers, what they typically do is they'll be able to exfiltrate, they'll be able to get their hands on hashes. Hashes are the format of what's basically an encrypted password. In this case, you can see it's an NTLM hash that they've been able to get their hands on. NTLM hash is known as hashcat in the mode 1000. They put the actual hash within the text file, and then they create a word list. The word list is going to be something basically around all the possibilities of what this password might be, or variations of the password. And you can see here, simply within seconds of being able to run it in basically a machine, when they're not basically mining cryptocurrency, they're cracking passwords. You can see here how quickly they were able to get the actually clear text password. The second part of the access brokers they will validate that the credentials still work. And they'll use tools like Crowbar. They'll target the actually public-facing IP address of the RDP system or the remote access, and they'll go through with those credentials and they'll validate that the credentials actually still do work. This is typically what accesses brokers. They might even go to the next stage where they might even do a remote access into those victims' machines. They might check and see what type of privileges does that user have, who is the organization, do a little bit more enumeration, and ultimately when they validate that credential side is the next stage they will go and sell it to other cyber criminals. They will sell it on the dark web, and ultimately now it's only a matter of time before somebody else purchases that credential for maybe 10, 50 bucks, euros, whatever it might be, and ultimately then it's only a case of basically them using that and deploying other types of malicious payloads into the environment. This is one of the most common methods that I see. Now, moving into this particular case here, this is actually from a real ransomware case. This is a victim, a large transportation organization, who ultimately, basically, their credential was stolen and sold in the dark web. And you can see here that for the person who was using this machine was an accountant, and they stored all the credentials, I'm not kidding you, on the desktop in clear text in a text file. Now the attacker was able to then see those credentials. They might go through and see, okay, what type of permissions or privileges does this user have? And you can see they're going to use net local groups. And now they see the next mistake that this organization used. Not only did they have a weak credential, weak password, storing them in clear text on the desktop, but they also were a member of the local administrator group as well. In this case, the attacker can then download different payloads. Here, one of the payloads they download, this is the real script the attackers used in order to then disable all of the actually services, antivirus protection that was on the system. And those services, which are protected services, you've got a 30-minute window before they restart again. So they now keep those sessions to 30 minutes or less. Now they're able to then put a backdoor using sticky keys. They then disable the actually storing password and enable it back to being stored in memory using registry key change. They then download Mimikatz, now that security has been disabled. They launch Mimikatz, and then are now able to exfiltrate and get that password in clear text. So this is a method that they use constantly. And you see here they were able to get the password of the domain administrator. The reason why they were able to get that credential was there was actually a backup job running on a nightly basis. Every night, a backup job taking a backup of the financial database. And that action led the attacker to be able to get the password and the actually hash in clear text. The next stage is they will go and validate that that credential does work. So they'll actually go and do RDP. One of the mistakes they did make was they actually left redirect printers on, which did expose the IP address of their source. They were using different VPNs and different Tor connections, but that one mistake they made left them a little bit of attribution. They then went and created some backdoor users. This is my alias, not the one that they used, but they created a similar process. Once they had domain administrator access, it was 4 hours between that initialization and they launched the ransomware attack and then demanded 20 million euros from the victim. This is typically what you see, and you can see here that even if they didn't have the password, they could simply use the hash in order to pass the hash to gain access. This is the blueprint that I see time and time again of every incident, whether it being data exfiltration, ransomware, even nation-state attacks, to APTs, to cyber criminals who are literally looking to gain money. So it's really important to understand about what techniques, what things you can do in order to minimize the risks of these. So one of the things I was thinking about, what type of demo can I show you in order to show you the capabilities of actually putting an identity security platform in place? And I thought, well, let me take one of the recent ones that I participated in, which is NATO Lock Shields. Is anyone in the room familiar with NATO Lock Shields? Okay, what is NATO Lock Shields? So NATO Lock Shields is the world's largest live-fire cyber exercise that's hosted by NATO Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, which is based in Tallinn. All the places where you see blue shields here are the countries that cooperate. You've got basically the most complex, with over 40 nations participating. It's the 15th year running. It consists of 18 teams, blue teams, who are defending the country of Beralia, which is an island that pops up in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And then their foe, the bad Crimsonia, attacks Beralia. You've got over 4,500 participants who are defending the country, 5,500 virtualized critical systems, over 8,000 cyber attacks over a 2-day period. And then it's also experts from all over the field. You've got from security to digital forensics to incident response to strategic communication. So this is as close to simulation of a country coming under a massive cyber attack. And as a blue team member, you have to discover, you have to harden those systems and defend the country. And ultimately, this is the environment that you're given, which has got lots of vulnerabilities, lots of default credentials, and lots of complex systems. You've got things such as basically IT procurement networks. You've got 5G networks. You've got SCADA control systems, energy grid, water supply. You've got air traffic control, air defense systems, to satellite systems, to cloud environments. So it's a very complex simulated environment, but you want to get to, to the point where you want to simulate as close to a real country's environment as possible. And as coming into this environment, one of the things we had to do was we had to go and discover this entire environment for the credentials, service accounts, applications, misconfigurations, and then rotate all those credentials and then provide access to the other blue team members who needed to protect this environment. So I do have a demo here, which is a video, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and show you the real system itself. So just bear with me while I switch over. Hopefully the internet connection is going to hold up for me here. So just bear with me while I connect. Okay, so just checking, you want to connect the screen again as it comes up. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing this okay. Let me just, I want to mirror display so I can see the same thing you're seeing on my screen. So what we're seeing here is basically the Segura identity security platform. And one of the things, the first things we had to do was we just deployed a connector. And the connector is the ability to then basically allow us to connect into the environment. And that connector is just simply a container that allows us to do things like discovery, remote access, and deploying that connector is what we simply did in this particular environment. So this is the thing that we had to deploy. Once it was deployed, it allowed us to do all the functionality of discovering credentials and identities. Once we had the connector deployed, the next thing we had to then do was discovery. And we did that connector deployment within about a couple of minutes. It literally took us less than 5 minutes to deploy the actually infrastructure and capabilities to do this identity security discovery capabilities. The next thing is then going and doing discovery across all of those different instances. So you can see here, for example, there's the the armed forces domain. We did an Active Directory discovery. We did device discovery. And what that simply does is it goes out and all those systems in the environment, it connects and actually pulls back all the credentials and all the devices that's available for that discovery. Once we've done the discovery, you can then see under here all the credentials that's discovered across that entire environment. For example, administrator accounts, default accounts, guest accounts, service accounts, root accounts, everything that we can actually get from that environment is then discovered. Not just the credentials, but also the devices, certificates, service accounts, SSH keys. Also from a DevOps perspective, you get containers, Ansible, Jenkins, Kubernetes. We can pull all that information from the discovery capability back into the platform. Once we went through and we've done discovery, the next stage is you want to be able to control those. Not only can we do it for basically traditional IDPs on premise, but you can also do it for cloud environments as well. Things like AWS, Google, Entra ID. Once we've discovered, we can then pull those back into the privileged account management or privileged access management capabilities. And that's where you can start providing things like remote access, rotating credentials at mass. One of the first things we had to do was go and actually rotate all the credentials in that environment, which was over 1,000 credentials, to make sure that they were unique, that they were not default, and then provide that access to other users. So you can see here that we actually have shortcuts to domain credentials, application, web application, just-in-time credentials. And that's when if you're doing a remote access to a system, what happens is it will actually create you a credential just in time as you're accessing that system, and then give you the credential just for the period of time you need to access that target system. And then once you've actually, your time is finished, that service desk ticket has been completed, and you finish that, that credential is then unprovisioned and removed. So you get to where you get ability to move to non-persistent privileges or zero standing privileges. Once we have basically discovered, we can then actually go and show things like the credential custodian. We can take a look at the access panel for me. So as a user, I have a credential that allows me role and scope. So I can look in here, you can see all the credentials that's been discovered that allow me to provide things like remote access. So I can actually go and start a session, and that session will then be recorded. The commands will be basically audited as well for suspicious activity. I can go and look at my custody of credentials as well. So these are the ones that I've checked out and locked from other users, and I've been wanting to make it available to other people. They can either recheck it back in and gain access, or I can release the custody from me in order to actually show that right now that credential is associated to my account as well. We can also see the credentials in the environment. So look at all credentials that's been managed and discovered, and then start doing actions, whether we want to rotate those credentials, whether we want to delegate access. So here you can see, for example, an access system. You can see Active Directory certificate services. And from here, we can either start a remote session. We can view the credential, the password. We can rotate the credential. We can make look at the history of access, the auditability. And then also make sure that only the right people have access to that system. We can also then get into things like the audited commands and dashboards. The minimum remote access here is for third-party remote access for things like suppliers, third-party vendors, remote contractors. The endpoint privilege management, that's the ability then not just to actually make sure you have end-to-end privilege management for the credentials, but also to make sure that only the applications that should be elevated should be actually executed. So in this case, we can take a look at the endpoint privilege management. And what you can see here is these are the actions and requests for applications to be elevated. And then we can also check the reputation of those applications, making sure that they actually are trusted, known, good reputation applications, and anything that is unknown or malicious can then be prevented from being executed. And then we can also get into things like the dashboards. So it's a fully end-to-end identity security platform that allows you to make sure that only those who should have access to the environment. When I went back and I talked about all of those MITRE ATT&CK framework techniques, things like initial access, where they actually had used weak credentials, they had persistent privileges, they're using domain controller, domain admin accounts to move around. All of these types of controls and techniques actually make those more difficult and make them be able to be back in control of you. So that's the demonstration side. So moving into kind of getting into what that really looks like is I've created what's called is the modern identity security and management matrix. And these are the things that every organization will have a different path that you want to go down. You have a different need and different motive in order for actually protecting the credentials in the environment. One of the things that really triggers those is the business risks and pains. Are you looking to solve things like reducing attacks such as ransomware or data exfiltration? Do you have actually regulatory commitments such as PCI compliance, ISO 27001, GDPR, NIST framework? All of those have some type of requirement, as well as NIST2, that you have to manage and protect privileged access and credentials. So all of this helps you actually do the auditability. It helps you discover those credentials and be able to put the right controls in place. Reducing things like business disruption and downtime. We saw, a year and a half ago, where there was an engineer that couldn't remote access into the air traffic control systems in the UK, causing almost a full day of downtime for the airlines, resulting in 100 million in damages from basically airlines not being able to move passengers around. So even things like business disruption. A lot of organizations during the CrowdStrike incident last year were able to use solutions like this in order to maintain operations and capabilities when those systems were unavailable. Third-party supply chains, insider risks, And then we get into the types of privileged access. There's lots of different types. It's not just the human credentials, but there's also application accounts. Who interacts with them? You might have your IT, your security team, your patch team, your operations team. You might have third-party suppliers, contractors. You might even have basically workloads, automation in place, APIs that's running in the background. Who the dependencies are, where they exist, they're all over the place. They're in your cloud, they're in your workloads, your virtual environments, your code. So being able to discover them across all of those different environments. How they access, what types of interactions do they have, what security controls are in place to protect them, and then ultimately, what's your motivation for protecting them? Is there a return on investment? Is there ability to make sure you're able to meet those compliance and industry requirements? At Segura, we help you achieve all of those areas for the identity security matrix with our basically complete identity security platform, which provides you the ability to actually not just manage privileges, third-party access, also providing your employees with actually a password manager and a password vault as well within the solution, managing application privileges, your DevOps and your continuous integration and development environments with secrets management, cloud identity access management, entitlements, and certificate management, all within a unified platform, making it easy for you to manage and to get the actual ability to protect identities and reduce the risks. In order to help you get there, one of the things my job is to do is not only to do research, but also to create knowledge and share that knowledge with you. One of the things I've created recently is the Identity Security Intelligence ebook. So if you actually want to get access, you can scan a QR code there. It is safe. It won't take you to anything malicious other than the ebook itself. But this is an ebook that will help you actually go through all of those methodologies that I share with you and help you get down the path of understanding about how to protect the environments and make the world a safer place and protect your identities and make your organizations and citizens reduce risk from identity-based cyber attacks. Hopefully this has been educational. I've tried to get a lot in there, including the hacker techniques as well as a live demonstration of the solution. I'm available if you have any questions. Now is the time to ask. So thank you, and hopefully this has been helpful. So any questions in the room? You can raise your hand.
We actually have enough time for questions. If you have any, just raise your hand. Okay, so thank you once again, Joseph. Ladies and gentlemen, make some noise. Joseph.
Okay, thank you. All the best.
Ačiū dar kartelį visiems susirinkusiems į konferenciją. Ačiū.